So, hi everyone. Welcome to the Modern Mind interview series where we bring everyday people just like you on stage, screen, wherever you are in the world here to tell us a little bit more about their mental fitness story, in addition to a couple ways that they practice mental fitness in their very busy, very real lives. So, today I have with me one of my most favorite humans in the world, Andre Plaut, who is an incredible learning designer, creative, videographer. Insert anything here, he can do it well. I have yet to max him out on his capabilities, in addition to an incredible father and husband. And so, without further ado, Andre, I would love to have you tell us a little bit more about who you are and, yeah, how you got here on the planet at this very time.
Thank you. Thank you, Lissy. First of all, the feeling is mutual. You're one of my favorite people of all time. So I'm very excited to sit here with you and talk about mental health and mental fitness and the journey that it is, because I think, this is something that we've talked a lot about in our sort of relationship and friendship is that it is a journey and that it's not like a destination that you all of a sudden can check off mental fitness off a list, and it's just like a thing that you're constantly trying to figure out and get better at. So I'm excited to talk about that because I have some developments. I have new things to share.
All right.
So that's exciting. So about me, about how I came to be the person that I am, which is a very deep question. So yeah, I'm definitely all of those things that you just listed. So I'm a learning designer and strategist. I run my own learning design and strategy studio called Human Machine, where I get to work with all sorts of different organizations, from companies like Mindy to big agencies, nonprofits, corporations, you name it, on really anything related to creating experiences for people, usually involving learning of some sort. But really the whole goal is to create different types of experiences to help folks become the best version of themselves, to help them communicate better, work with each other better, to make these machines that we've all built, these companies, these organizations that are ultimately human-based, they're human-based machines, work better. So that's a little bit about me. You listed a few other things that make me who I am as well, which is a dad to a delightful little 2-year-old, husband, film nerd, soccer fan, coffee aficionado, you name it. And yeah, how did I get here? Great question. I'm sort of from all over the place. Was born in Brazil, moved around a lot as a kid, to Florida. I've been in New York for 16 years now, which feels like its own accomplishment. This is a fun side note, but when I, like 2 or 3 years into living in New York City, I found like a new primary care physician. And after my first appointment with her, she was like, "How are you feeling? How are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm physically doing fine. Like, I'm a little bit stressed. I'm a little bit anxious." And she said, "Leave New York." She's like, "This is my like official doctor's recommendation. You're too young to be stressed. You're too young to be anxious. The problem is that you live in New York City. You should leave New York." And I did not follow her advice. And I'm very happy I didn't follow her advice. But I think she was on to something.
Well, we'll loop back to that because I did leave New York at one point when I was at like my most stressed state. But I'm curious, like what has kept you here, given that was something that very early on you were starting to experience?
Yeah. I mean, my relationship with New York is one of, I think, like all kind of great lifelong relationships. It's one that is sort of feels timeless and meant to be, and like something that you've always sort of wanted, but it also challenges you and sort of pushes you to be a better version of yourself. And that comes with struggles. It's one of the first things I remember wanting on my own, like literally being like a little 6-7-year-old little boy in Brazil. I had just seen New York City in the movies, and I was just like, that's for me. Like, that's where I belong. I want to be in New York City. And so to me, it was sort of, as much of it is a cliche, it was like sort of New York or nowhere. And I kind of worked throughout my life to make that a possibility and to make that a reality, and moved here for film school. And yeah, pretty much right off the bat, I was just like, this is it. This is my place, which, yeah, doesn't mean that it's not challenging. And I've certainly, you just said that in a moment of extreme kind of anxiety and stress that leaving New York was the right thing for you. I've had many of those moments where I was going through really hard times and I was just like, I might need to go back home for a little bit. I might need to leave this environment. And for whatever reason, I just didn't and sort of stuck it through for better or for worse. But yeah, there's just something about somebody who like I'm fairly introverted. I'm somebody who needs to like protect my energy and sort of conserve it as much as possible. And there's a counterbalance to that in New York, where it's a place that wants your energy all of the time and it sort of demands it in a way. It's very loud. It's constantly moving. It's a place where you can't rest much. You can't sort of just chill out. You're sort of constantly striving to do something. And I feel like I need that in my life. I need that level of excitement and sound in my life to balance out my more quiet introversion. And so that's why New York and I are a perfect match.
Very cool. I love that. I think there's something really interesting about New York in that I think a lot of people talk about New York in the same language they do talk about like a person. Like it's usually in this like,
Yeah.
we're in a relationship, it's this push pull, we balance each other. Sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's really hard. And I'm curious, like I've never had anyone on the show yet that I've been able to ask this, but I feel like I can ask you. So we're going to do it. Um, how do you take
Please.
your lessons from your relationship with New York and apply them to the good and bad moments of the relationships in your life? You don't have to tell us like who those relationships are about.
Wow.
Maybe you have somebody in mind, but yeah, how could you relate them?
Sure. No, I think that's a great question. I will say sort of top level, like general sort of comparison between the two. I think I feel very similarly about New York as I do about my wife and my marriage, which is that it both relationships feel like I've always been here and it is like new and fresh every day. Like it's sort of crazy for me to think. So I've been in New York City for 16 years. I've been together with my wife Ariel for 12 years,
Wow.
and both of those relationships feel like I can hardly remember a time when I wasn't in those relationships, and they don't feel stale. They don't feel like, man, I've just been here forever and what am I doing? And that feels like an incredible thing. It sort of tells me that they're the right people, that she's the right person, this is the right place for me. Is like I mentioned a little bit in my intro, I moved around a lot as a kid, and I know that you've sort of, what that's like a little bit. And I think about the fact that I basically never really spent more than 4 to 6 years in one place. I was pretty much moving every 4 to 6 years. And so you'd think that being in one place for 16 years would, after a certain point, I'd be like, I gotta get out. Like I gotta move on to something else. I just don't feel that way about New York. And it almost amazes me that that's like, when I think about like, wow, 16 years, like I can't even conceptualize how long that is. It's a similar
Yeah.
thing, I think, with my marriages. Yeah, it just sort of feels like, wow, we've been together for so long. This is the longest relationship I've ever had. And it doesn't feel that way in a way. It feels sort of new all the time. So I think that's a big thing. And then I think more broadly, I think it's this idea that things that are worthwhile are worth working through, and that really valuable, important relationships, whether it's to a city or to a person, don't have to be a fairy tale. Like it's okay for you to go through challenging moments. It's okay for you to go through a time where it maybe doesn't feel right. And that if you work through it, it can be long lasting and it can be a worthwhile endeavor. But that you also have to sort of care for yourself too, right? And that it's not about just like giving all of yourself to a relationship or to a place or whatever. It's about finding your place in it and making sure that you're still sort of authentic and true to yourself in the context of that place or that relationship. And I think if you can't do that, and I've known plenty of people that are still in my life that lived here in New York and then have left New York, and they were just like, yeah, it wasn't the right place for me anymore. I think that's amazing. They sort of found that it was right for a certain time in their life and not right for another time. And knowing yourself that well, I think, is such a great thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that is an interesting thing about, I think both like places we live and also relationships, right? Like we kind of move in and out of them always. And sometimes my aunt says this,
Yeah.
I love you, Aunt Beth. She says relationships are like double helixes. Like sometimes we're further away and our relationship kind of feels more distant from it. And sometimes we're like really close together and then we kind of move like this. And I'm curious, like when I think about living in New York, I feel like there's like 12 mental fitness lives you could talk about in a day, meaning like, if mental fitness is the practice of these like positive research backed habits that help you, build focus, resilience, and high performance in your mind, but also help you deal with stress. Like whether it's a bump on the subway or like somebody taking your cab or like,
Mm-hmm.
it starts raining all of a sudden and then it's sunny and then you're freezing inside and then it's hot outside, like whatever. There's like 1,000 uncontrollable moments in any one day. I want to get a little bit more into your mental fitness story because maybe that started
Yeah.
here. Maybe this started with moving around growing up, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship with, your mind and how that's developed over time.
Totally. Right before I go into that,
Please.
to your exact point about sort of like New York City can be sort of like 12 different mental fitness journeys in one day. That's 100% correct. And I think one thing that I figured out about living in New York, and I say this to most people that I talk to, and I probably figured this out 6-7 years into living in New York, which is that it feels like there's sort of almost two different ways you can survive living in New York City for a long period of time. It sort of, there's like a little bit of a fork in the road. You either become like extremely hardened and you become like very apathetic and you kind of just like shut the world out because it's too, all of those things that you just described, somebody taking your cab, some crazy thing happening on the subway, being like absolutely packed like sardines on the train. Like you either absolutely have to harden yourself and just like put up a lot of walls in order to deal with that much humanity in your face all the time, or you have to do the complete opposite and just like completely open yourself up and sort of fall in love with the sort of oddness and uniqueness of humanity and just like love all of those experiences for what they are. I think they're both legitimate ways of going about it. And I think I've definitely tried to go the opening myself up route to just love the differences and challenges and craziness of the city. I think that is a part of my mental fitness journey, is just sort of realizing that you have to open yourself up to the challenges and the pain and the struggles. It's all a part of it, and you're going to learn from those things. You're going to get better from those things, and that's been a much better thing for me than feeling like I should close myself off or build a wall. That was a roundabout way for me to get to your second question around mental fitness journey.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It reminds me of like you can take like the path of, the leaf on the stream and kind of like float through and let the city knock you in all sorts of fortuitous directions, or you're like basically trying to like get yourself, really protected so that nothing can touch you. Obviously, the former being something that's a lot more related to mental fitness, the latter being a little harder to do. We do not provide any sort of equipment or materials to protect yourself, physically in the world from the highs and lows
Right.
that might show up. But I really love that as like a framework. I will also suggest though that I think there's like the middle way, which is like the fluctuation between those two states, which I think most New Yorkers can relate to. Those periods where like sometimes you're closed and sometimes you think that like this city is like, with all of its grossness and amazingness, like the coolest place in the world. So yeah, but
Yeah.
want to hear more about your journey, but just had a lot to relate to there.
Totally. So yeah, I think my journey in mental fitness and mental health, I think it started as mental health. Basically, I really early on in my life. So growing up in São Paulo in Brazil, another really big city, I think another city that sort of requires you to make similar decisions or sort of have a similar kind of exposure to all of humanity. And it was hard. It was hard for me as a kid. It was just overwhelming, and things around sort of crime and safety, I think, were big fears for me, rightfully or not. And so that led me to do therapy as a child pretty early on, which was totally life-changing. I think it made a huge difference for me in being able to, more than anything, just being able to talk about feelings, being able to label feelings, giving myself space to feel the things that I was feeling validated in those things. Yeah, it was a game changer. I think it gave me tools for life on how to deal with challenging mental health issues. And then it also sort of got me really interested in all of the different ways that we care for ourselves, and think about emotional health, mental fitness. So after having the ability and the privilege to have professional therapeutic help as a child, I think carried on through the rest of my kind of teenagehood and young adolescence. But beyond that, I think more into my later stages of life, within the last 10 to 15 years, um, a combination of continued therapy. I think especially before becoming a parent, I realized that there's a lot that you can inadvertently kind of share with your child that you don't mean to, whether that's your anxieties and your stresses and expectations. And I knew that I wanted to get ahead of that before my son was born. I wanted to sort of work through some of those things on my own so that I could try limiting how much of that was going to him. And I think there's a certain extent to that, which is like a little bit inevitable. Um, in college, I was really interested in Buddhism for a while, and really kind of explored all of the tools that are in that tradition in terms of meditation and philosophies of life, and how to approach it in ways that felt right to me. And the new thing that I'm excited to share with you is that I recently took up meditation again. It's something that I sort of tried
Oh,
doing for a little bit, and am now doing it again, specifically studying transcendental meditation, which has been really great so far. It has
oh.
helped me create like a little bit more kind of inner quiet and peace through that. Going through the Mindy program, I think, was a huge kind of unlock for me as well a couple of years ago when I was going through a pretty tough time, and it was like my early parenting days, and you're sort of sleep deprived. And I think when you hear about burnout, like I was as toasty as it gets. I was super burnt out, and feeling like, great, like I have a therapist that's helping me on the sort of mental health front, but I'm still exhausted all the time, and I'm still sort of feeling a lack of motivation, and kind of effort just felt really hard. And so I think taking time every single day to do these exercises, to just breathe, to meditate, made a huge difference. But yeah, I think mental fitness, mental health, all of these things have always been really fascinating to me. And I think it's just from early days of having access to those types of tools and seeing the impact that they can have.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it's been a pretty like windy journey. I think for some people it's like they experience it, it comes and goes. It's kind of like the staccato. And for you, it's kind of been like almost like a part of your like personal development as you've gotten older, in addition to being
Yeah.
obviously something that you were looking at to help you feel better as a kid, which is really, really cool that you've been able to layer these different elements on. I'm curious, like, okay, so there's a lot of parents I talk to every day. I'm not a parent yet. I hope to be someday, outside of my 4.5-year-old company. And I'm curious, like, how do you think about mental fitness differently, or mental health? You can talk about either as a parent versus free parenthood, because there seems to be this divide in the conversation. And yeah, you've experienced and kind of like lived in both places. And so, yeah, I'd love to just hear a little bit more from you on that.
Yeah. Wow. This conversation could be 3 hours long if I really go into that's it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and it's something that I love talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say overall, parenting does a lot of things. One of the things it does is add a different lens to how you view the world, where you start viewing the world not just as what is my experience or what do I believe, but you start looking at it as what is my child's experience, what do I need to believe for them. And so, like I mentioned, one of the big pieces of motivation for me to go back into therapy was because I sort of recognized that it's no longer like my anxiety and my sort of stress is no longer going to be primarily impacting me. It's going to be potentially impacting my child for a long time. And I knew, again, I think there's a certain degree of inevitability there, but I knew that there's work I could do to make that better. And so that was a big motivating factor for me there. But yeah, I think it's while my wife was pregnant, I read a book written by these two like childhood psychologists and neurologists. Talks a lot about like brain development and emotional development, and how you as a parent can work with your child to really deal with challenging emotions, and you can use every part of their brain to connect stories to emotions to those like fight or flight responses and all of that stuff. It was really fascinating. It was a great book. And then at the very end of the book, there's just like a chapter to finish the book. And that chapter essentially was like, all of the stuff we just talked about is like great and you should use it, but like none of it is helpful. None of it is going to work if you don't deal with your own childhood trauma first. And I was like, okay, like this should have been early in the book. It basically talks about the fact that like most parents kind of fall into two buckets. I'm gonna go two extreme ends of a spectrum again. One bucket is the like, I'm gonna do everything that my parents did because my childhood was amazing and my parents are incredible, and I'm gonna like try to replicate my exact childhood. And then the other bucket is, I'm going to do everything opposite of my parents. Like, I'm going to just undo all of the traumas that I had as a child. Everything that they did, I want to do the opposite of. And the reality is, you should sort of not do either. I think to your point of there being this middle way, you have to deal with those traumas that you have. You can appreciate your parents for what they did. But then you should ask yourself, like, what are my unique values and what are the values of my partner if you're raising kids with a partner? And what do I think is right for my specific child? And that, your kid isn't this like vehicle for you to fix your childhood. Like, your childhood is done. Like, you did that. This is a chance to provide somebody with a brand new experience. And you should take lessons from your own, but it's not about fixing your own childhood or replicating your own childhood. It's about creating a whole new experience for this whole new person. And I just thought that was fascinating and a very valuable lesson. So, that to me is one of the big things in terms of thinking about mental fitness when you're a parent, is that it really tests you. It requires patience. It requires presence. It requires thoughtfulness. It requires you to really think about, like, how do I deal with this, or what is the value that I want to impart in this moment. And I don't know anybody who can just do that. Like, I think it takes work. Like, that's part of parenting, is the journey of just trying to do it better every day. And that to me is the same with mental fitness, and I've certainly have used a lot of tools from my sort of circuitous mental fitness journey in trying to be the best parent I can be.
Very cool. There's like so much in there. You're right. We could probably go on for maybe 3 days, not even 3 hours, with like so many of the nuggets that you shared. But I do think I love it. It's so cool what you said, which is like, at the end of the book, it said you kind of have to deal with your own shit if you want to help your kid with this stuff. Because I think that's true for all of this work, right? It's really natural to tell other people to go to therapy or to take care of themselves, to breathe. But are you breathing? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you going to therapy? And then when you get kids,
yes,
I think one of the coolest parts about children is that they're like emotion detectors. What you were saying earlier about being able to pick up on your stuff and your anxieties and everything. I think that's just, I think all of us have that little spidey sense. Like, are you doing the things you're asking to? Are you practicing this every day? So there's so much cool insight that you shared. So thanks for that, Andre. I'm curious. Now I want to hear about some of these tools. So we always ask folks to share 1 to 2. If you have 3, amazing, but like very specific things that you do to work on your mental fitness. I think it's really natural to think that every time you're really stressed, like everything in your life needs to change, but usually it's just like a couple small, sometimes medium, sometimes big things that you can do. So I'm curious, like, what are those things that you do and that you think other folks may find interesting too?
Yeah, I'll try to choose a few that represent like small, medium, and large things. I think in the large bucket, like I mentioned, I've started doing TM or transcendental meditation, and that practice basically says that you should meditate for 20 minutes twice a day. So you're devoting about 40 minutes a day to meditation, which initially felt like a lot to me, and I think for a lot of folks, especially if their parents listening, feels like a lot to ask for. I have found it pretty easy to find those times. And I've found meditating to be really restorative. And again, I mentioned that I'm introverted and find really need to sort of protect my energy in that sense. And this is a time that I'm just sitting silently for 20 minutes and recharging. So that's been a pretty valuable tool that I've been using. On the sort of small end, something as simple as I've just been reading more before bed. I just put my phone away. I'm looking at either a physical book or a Kindle screen, so I'm not like using my iPad or anything, and just having that time out from technology, um, I think really does make a big difference. During the pandemic, I got really into sleep, not in like I just slept a lot kind of way, but I read books about sleep and I bought a sleep tracker, and I just got like really into cleaning up my sleep hygiene and making sure that my like sleep score was going up. And I think that's just, it's really important. It's crazy that we sort of live in a society where sleep is one of the things we feel like we can sacrifice. Like, I'm stressed, or I have too much to do, or I want to be out with friends, and I don't need to sleep. I can sleep for 2 to 4 hours. And that does some like real physical damage to you. You know, maybe that's my middle bucket item, is prioritizing sleep, like really setting up good sleep hygiene, which this book that I read about sleep talks about how there's nothing that you can do to guarantee good sleep. This book was like pretty anti-sleep medication. So it was like, there's nothing you can do to guarantee good sleep. All you can do is increase the likelihood that you'll get really good sleep. And that's what sleep hygiene is all about. So like things like making sure your room is the right temperature, not looking at a screen 20 to 30 minutes before going to bed. Even taking a shower before you go to bed can help decrease your body temperature. So there's all these little things that you can do to just increase the likelihood that your sleep will be good.
And
But yeah, I
quick
think
question
sleep
on
is a
that.
huge one. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious, like a lot of parents would tell you, like, whoa, Andre must have a kid who sleeps. Like, that must be nice. And so what would you say to them? Like, there's a couple things you listed, but I am curious, like you're a real
Yeah.
life dad, you're very present in your son's life. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious, like what would you say to them?
They're right. I'm very blessed in having a kid who sleeps really well, which was not always the case. I mean, I would say for the first year of his life, he was not the world's greatest sleeper. So on one hand, they're correct. He sleeps really well, so that allows us to sleep pretty well. But I think that also took a lot of work, and we did a lot of things to help him with his sleep and make sure that he felt comfortable sleeping when traveling or sleeping at different places, and feeling like he has a routine. And I think that actually kind of dovetails with a different mental fitness practice for me, is just having somewhat of a routine. I think a lot about, I have these like little personal metaphors or analogies that help me understand the world. And I think a lot about how really big structures like bridges or big skyscrapers, they are bendy. They're very flexible. And our brains are the same way. We there's this concept of neuroplasticity, right? Like our brains are flexible, they change. And that it's really important that they are that way. That if you had really rigid buildings or really rigid bridges or and really rigid buildings, during a storm, they would collapse. They would just be super frail, and they would crack. So they need to be bendy. They need to be flexible. And I think that applies to me in my life. That applies to the way that I think we try to approach our son. Is there should be structure. There should be routine. There are things that we do pretty ritualistically, whether it's like bath time and then reading a book and like turning on the white noise machine and putting, like, there's all of these rituals, but they're bendy. They're things that can move and bend a little bit depending on what's happening that day, or if we're traveling with him, we adapt the routine, but we always keep a version of it. And I think that helped him a lot. I think that helped us as parents to sort of ground ourselves to something. I think doing things like breathing exercises or checking Mindy every morning, or doing meditation, those habits, those routines, you have to be a little bit flexible about them, but having that there, I think, is really helpful and important, and pays dividends. So those would be my big, I think, tools that I use.
I love them. And I really appreciate the metaphor of these routines helping you create the structure that you need to be flexible. Like that in many ways, like
Yeah.
in many ways. And that like was what the visual brought up for me. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of people think about structure and they think like, oh, wow, that's like not me or it's not helpful. And what also struck me was
Hmm.
that in so many ways, the things you're talking about around sleep hygiene are the same things you do for your kid. And I always joke that if we all behaved like kids, we wouldn't
Yeah.
need Mindy, like we just, we make sure the kids get outside and they're playing and they're creative and they're stretching their brains and that they're thoughtful, emotionally supported, working to identify their own feelings. So it's very cool to hear you kind of like tie those things in. I'm curious. I'm going to ask you a set of rapid fire questions right now, really quick answers to them. And normally I start with one, but I actually want to finish up this section. So I'm going to ask you, like, someone nudges you on the subway, you miss your train. It's one of those like crazy New York days where, they sold out of your favorite croissant in the morning, their coffee spills all over your shirt, like whatever. What is like the thing you do in the moment? What's like the tiny mental fitness thing that you do just to like collect yourself when you're kind of feeling stressed and a little out of control?
Would probably just hit pause, just probably stand somewhere for a minute, maybe find like a park nearby. I would take a few deep breaths. And this is a weird niche thing, but right before the pandemic, I, for whatever reason, had developed some flight anxiety. I was just like super anxious on planes. And I found this one album from this like band that's no longer together from Canada that like are not very famous, that their music just had this like extraordinarily soothing effect on me. And so this happened a couple of weeks ago. I was having like a really stressful morning. I was really anxious about a thing that I was going to, and I just put this album on and it like instantly drops my heart rate. So music is a big thing for me. So I would say I would put on some relaxing music and just take a beat, like breathe, close your eyes, even if it's like 30 seconds and keep going.
So cool. What's the album and the band?
The name of the band is Seoul, like the city in South Korea. And the name of the album is, I'm pulling up, I Become a Shade. It's the name of the album.
Ooh. Okay. We'll have to put that in the show notes. I'm going to check it out for sure. Okay. Next rapid fire question. What is your favorite book, podcast, article that you have read on the topic of mental fitness that has stuck with you?
Well, I'm gonna drop the book that I read about childhood emotional development because I think I thought it was great and really insightful, and all of the things that they talk about in it, I was like, oh, like adults should do this. This is just general good life skills. So the name of the book is Whole Brained Child. And yeah, it was, again, I read it probably about a year before I needed it, but maybe I needed it for myself more than anything else.
Super cool. Um, Next one. Best piece of life advice you've ever gotten or that you're living by right now?
I think this is like a little bit cliche, but I'll go with it. I think this idea that everyone is just figuring it out. And there's so many different places that you sort of can hear this advice. I think the one that's coming up top of mind for me is, I think there's a Steve Jobs speech or graduation address that he gives where he talks about this. And as a former Apple employee, I feel like I'm obligated to quote him. But yeah, he basically talks about how nobody really knows exactly what they're doing, or nobody has really like figured it out. And even when you look up to people or you think somebody has like a perfect life or they've totally figured it out, it's just not the case. And I think we're all sort of trying really hard, and that being a human being is hard. Being a parent is really hard. Being a founder and CEO is really hard. Like all of these things that we take on, but just getting out of bed in the morning is not a given. And that all of us are grappling with questions of identity and who we are and how we react and what we're doing in life. And so I think the life advice that it's okay to feel that way, to feel that you haven't figured it all out or that you're struggling through things, that the fact that you feel that way is also the way that everyone feels. So one, there's like a little bit of self-acceptance in that. And then there's another aspect to that, which is about empathy and compassion for people, to say that everyone you come across is working through it and dealing with their own doubts and insecurities and fears. And it allows me to empathize with people, and, you know, allows me to do the thing that I talked about at the beginning of our conversation in New York, where you're just sitting on the subway and you kind of love everyone around you, even though you're on top of each other, because you know everybody else is also doing what you're doing, which is moving through life and trying to answer these big questions for themselves.
Totally. Wow. Um, cool. That was the message I needed to hear today. So thank you for that, Andre. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
Awesome. Okay. Two last questions. One
Great.
is, what advice would you give to somebody who is a new parent, who's feeling incredibly stressed out, and they need to just take one first step? Like, what do you wish someone had said to you when you were at your most tired in that year that maybe you weren't sleeping as much and things felt really hard?
I'm pausing because there's so many things I want to say. I think I'm going to say one thing that was said to me at that time that helped me, and I think it's related to the point that I made a little earlier. Somebody told me, your son does not have any other parents but you two. Like, you're his only parents. And that means that whatever you do, as long as you do it from a place of like care and compassion and love, which for us, you know, like that's like, of course, where we're coming from, that it's going to be okay. And that, you know, I think you spend a lot of time comparing yourself with other people and asking yourself, like, am I being a good parent? And is this okay, what I'm doing? So this recognition that, like, you're this little kid's parent, and you're not going to get it all perfectly right. And as long as you love them and you're caring for them, and you are waking up every day looking for ways to do it better, then you're doing great. And it's not going to feel like that all the time. It literally might change minute to minute, but it's sort of this recognition that it's more important that you're showing up and that you're being a loving parent, knowing that you're not going to get it right all the time.
Very cool. It's interesting. I remind myself that every day about building a business too, which is just that, you know, I'm the only one who's building Mindy. And well, sometimes you think like, oh, there's got to be someone better than me or more experienced, or who knows more of what's going on at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like, I'm showing up with that same kind of intention. And so, yeah, another message. I really appreciate, Andre. Thank you so much.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Last question for you is, where can people find you if they want to learn more about human machine, if they want to learn more about how you think about parenting, or you think about designing experiences or beyond?
Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn. So you can just look for my name, and I'll be there. And I haven't posted much lately, but that's on my to-do list. You can go to my website. So the website is just like the letter A, humanmachine.com. So ahumanmachine.com. And that's basically the two places that I'm at. I haven't really been on Twitter or X or Threads much, especially in the last few years. I think I might need to change that eventually again and go back on the social media. I think that was honestly a little bit of a mental fitness decision I made, is to spend less time on social media. So yeah, right now my website and LinkedIn are the two best places to find me. You can always shoot me an email. You can send an email to either andreplaut@gmail.com or andre@ahumanmachine.com. And I'd love to chat with anybody who reaches out.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know how busy you are, Andre, and it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, to learn from and with you. And for all those who joined us today, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of The Modern Mind. Andre is an incredibly special, brilliant human. So whether you're looking to engage in learning design, or again, just think about the world a little differently, he's your guy. And we will see you on our next show. So with that, thank you. And thank you, Andre.